My husband left me for his mistress and sold our house while I was traveling. But when I came back, I discovered the apartment was in my name, and his new girlfriend left him when she found out. I'm 34 years old. I work in financial consulting, and what happened to me 6 months ago still feels unreal when I think about it. Like those things you see in bad movies but never think will actually happen to you. I was in Seattle, at a 3-day conference about I don't know what boring investment thing, and I get this call from Derek, my husband of 7 years. 7 years? Can you believe it? 7 years sharing everything, or so I thought. And the guy calls me on a Tuesday at 9 at night while I was at the hotel bar having a gin and tonic after an endless day of presentations, and he says, just like that, Isabella, we need to talk. And I thought, okay, what happened? Did he forget to pay the internet bill or something? You know, normal couple stuff. But no, the man drops on me that he wants a divorce, that he met someone else, that he doesn't love me anymore, and that he sold the apartment to start a new life with her. Just like that, like someone ordering a pizza. I just sat there with the phone in my hand thinking, am I dreaming? Is this real? Because literally 2 weeks ago, we'd been talking about renovating the kitchen, changing the bedroom furniture, and now he was telling me he sold our home, the house where we lived, where we had all our stuff, our photos, our memories, everything. Derek kept talking on the other end of the line, saying something about how the sale was already closed, that the new owners were taking possession in 2 weeks, that I had to get my stuff out before I got back from my trip, and all I could think was, this man is completely insane. He was telling me he'd already found a new place with Melissa. That's the woman's name, Melissa. And that I'd have to find something too, because the money from the sale was already committed to his new life. His new life. Those were his exact words. And the worst part of it all is that he said it with this calm voice. So casual. Like he was commenting on the weather. Like he hadn't just completely dynamited my existence. I tried to talk, tried to ask him what the hell was wrong with him, but he cut me off and said, "There's nothing to discuss, Isabella. It's already decided." And he hung up. Just like that, hung up the phone and left me sitting there in that bar, surrounded by drunk executives talking about stocks and bonds, feeling like I'd been hit in the stomach with a bat. I didn't sleep that night, obviously. I stayed in the hotel room staring at the ceiling, trying to process what had just happened, and that's when I started thinking about the practical details, because my brain sometimes works like that. When I'm in shock, I get super logical and start analyzing everything. And I remembered something important, something Derek had clearly forgotten or just didn't know because he never paid attention to those details. About 8 months ago, we'd refinanced the apartment mortgage because we got a better rate. And when we went to the bank to do all the paperwork, the officer explained to us that to qualify for that specific rate, the apartment had to be in one person's name, whoever had better credit. And it turns out I had a better credit score than Derek because he'd had some issues with some credit cards years ago. Nothing serious, but enough to lower his score. So we put everything in my name. Everything. The complete deed to the apartment was legally in my name. Just mine. Isabella Martinez. It didn't even say married to or anything like that. Just my name. I got up at 6 in the morning, canceled all my meetings for the next day, changed my flight and called Victoria, my friend from college who's now a real estate lawyer, one of the best in the city, by the way. Victoria answered, half asleep because it was like 6:30 in the morning in our city. But when I told her what had happened, the woman woke up completely and told me, "Isabella, come to my office as soon as you get here. This is illegal. Completely illegal. Your husband can't sell a property that's not his." And I felt this enormous relief mixed with a rage I can't describe, because it meant that Derek hadn't just betrayed me and left me for someone else, but he'd also tried to defraud me. He'd tried to sell my apartment, my property, to go live his happy life with his mistress. Can you imagine the level of nerve? The man thought he could just sell something that didn't belong to him, and I was going to stand there accepting it like an idiot. I got to the city the next afternoon, went straight to Victoria's office without even stopping by my house. Well, by my apartment, and she'd already investigated everything. She showed me the papers, confirmed that indeed the apartment was 100% in my name, that any sale Derek had made was completely void, that he had no legal right to sell that property, and that the buyer could even sue him for fraud if they wanted. Victoria had already contacted the buyer's lawyer, had sent them a copy of the deed and a letter, explaining the situation, and basically told them that if they tried to take possession of the apartment, she was going to proceed legally against everyone involved. The buyer, a guy who apparently was an investor who wanted the apartment to rent out, got so scared that he immediately canceled everything and even threatened to sue Derek for trying to sell him something that didn't belong to him. Victoria explained to me that technically Derek had committed a crime, that he could go to prison for this, but that she recommended first resolving the divorce issue and then deciding if we wanted to proceed criminally against him. And that night, I finally went to the apartment. Derek was there, sitting on the couch watching TV like nothing happened, and when he saw me come in with my suitcase, he stood up and said, "I thought you weren't coming back until Friday." And I told him, "We need to talk." And he started with his speech again about how the decision was already made, that Melissa this and Melissa that, and I let him talk for like 2 minutes before interrupting him and telling him, "Derek, the apartment is in my name. You couldn't sell it. The sale is invalid." You should have seen his face. Literally turned white, opened his mouth like a fish, and just stood there not knowing what to say. Then he tried to argue, told me that was a technicality, that the apartment belonged to both of us because we were married, that he had a right to half. And I explained to him, with a calm I don't know where I got from, that yes, in the divorce we'd have to divide assets, but that meanwhile he had no right to sell my property, and that what he'd done was illegal, that the buyer had already canceled everything, and that my lawyer was considering proceeding criminally against him. He went crazy, started yelling that I was ruining his life, that Melissa had already left her apartment because he'd promised her they were going to live together in this place, that now they had nowhere to live, and I honestly couldn't believe what I was hearing. I told him, "Derek, you called me 2 days ago to tell me you were leaving me, that you'd sold my house, and now you're angry because it turns out you couldn't do that? Seriously?" He kept yelling, saying that I'd always been controlling. That's why he'd looked for someone else, that Melissa understood and appreciated him, the whole typical cheater speech trying to justify himself, and I simply told him he had 3 options. Either he left the apartment voluntarily that same night, or I called the police to have him removed, or he signed immediately the divorce papers Victoria was already preparing and left on good terms. He looked at me with a hatred I'd never seen in him, but I think he finally understood that this time he wasn't going to be able to manipulate me, so he grabbed his keys and left, slamming the door, yelling that he was coming back the next day for his stuff. But it didn't end there, because the next day Derek showed up, with Melissa, and let me tell you, the situation was so surreal it even made me laugh. Melissa was younger than me. She must have been like 28, blonde, made up like for a party, and she arrived with this attitude like she owned the place, looking at everything in the apartment and making comments about what she was going to change when she moved in. I was in the kitchen making myself coffee. I'd taken the day off work, obviously, and when I saw her come in with Derek, with her super high heels and her designer bag, I thought, this woman has no idea what's happening. Derek completely ignored me and started showing Melissa the apartment, telling her, "Here we're going to put your office. Here we can make a walk-in closet for you." And I let them continue with their imaginary tour while I finished my coffee, waiting for the perfect moment. When they finished touring the place, Melissa sat on my couch, put her feet on my coffee table, and told me with this sweet and fake voice, "You're going to. We have to hurry with the move because we need to start bringing our stuff. The painters are coming next week." And I sat across from her, put my coffee cup on the table, and told her, "Melissa, did Derek tell you that this apartment is legally in my name? That he tried to sell it without my permission? That the sale was canceled because he committed fraud?" The girl's face changed completely. She looked at Derek looking for an explanation, and he started stammering something about it being just a temporary problem, that his lawyer was going to resolve everything. Pure lies. I took out my phone, showed Melissa a photo of the apartment deed, explained the whole situation to her, and told her, "You left your apartment because this man promised you a house that wasn't his, a house he had no right to offer you. Basically, he lied to you and used you." Melissa stood up from the couch, yelled at Derek that he was a liar and a fraud, that she'd left everything for him, that she'd told her family she was going to marry a divorced man who had properties, and now it turned out he had nothing, that he wasn't even divorced yet. It was a beautiful moment. I'm not going to lie, seeing how his perfect plan crumbled before his eyes. Melissa grabbed her bag, looked at me and said, "I'm sorry. I didn't know anything about this. He told me you guys had been separated for months." And she left the apartment, leaving Derek standing there like an idiot. He tried to follow her, but she yelled at him from the hallway not to look for her anymore, that she wasn't going to be with a liar and a criminal, and she left. Derek stood there in the middle of the living room, And for the first time since this whole disaster started, I saw him truly defeated. He wasn't yelling anymore, wasn't threatening. He was just standing there with his shoulders slumped, and I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But not quite, because the man had tried to leave me on the street to go off with his mistress. I told him, "Derek, you have until 6 in the evening to get all your stuff out of here. Whatever you leave after that time, I'm going to donate or throw away. And if you don't leave voluntarily, I'm going to call the police." He nodded without saying anything, called a friend to help him with his stuff, and they spent the next few hours packing his clothes, his books, his stupid action figure collections that I always hated but never said anything, because I thought marriages were about accepting each other's weirdness. By 5:30, he was done. He left the keys on the kitchen table, and before leaving, he told me, "Isabella, you were always too cold. That's why I looked for someone who made me feel alive." And I answered him, "Derek, you looked for someone who was dumb enough to believe your lies, but it turned out you couldn't even get that right." He left without saying anything else. The following months were weird. I'm not going to lie. Victoria handled the whole divorce thing, and Derek signed the papers, without fighting. I think his lawyer explained to him that if he tried to fight for the apartment, I could proceed criminally against him for the fraudulent sale attempt. So basically, he accepted everything we proposed. We divided the other assets. He took his car, I kept mine. We split the joint bank accounts we had, which wasn't much because I'd always managed my finances separately. Thank God. And that was it. The divorce was finalized. About 4 months after all the drama, and I kept my apartment, my job, my life. What surprises me most about all this is that I thought I was going to fall apart, that I was going to be crying for weeks, that I was going to need therapy and all that. But the truth is, I felt liberated. That apartment Derek wanted to sell and give to his mistress. I completely redesigned it. I hired a designer, changed the furniture, painted the walls, put plants everywhere, turned his stupid video game room into a beautiful office for me, and basically erased every trace of him. My friend Hannah helped me with everything. We spent a whole weekend getting rid of stuff, donating what was useful, throwing away what wasn't, and it was almost therapeutic, like closing a chapter and opening a new one. I even had a small party when we finished, invited my friends, we drank wine on the terrace, and we toasted to new beginnings and to the idiots who leave our lives leaving us their apartments. About a month ago, I ran into a mutual friend who told me that Derek is still living in a small studio, that Melissa blocked him on all social media and never got back with him, and that apparently he's very sorry about everything. Honestly, I don't know if I care. Like, I don't care what happens to him. He's not my problem anymore. I'm here, in my apartment that I almost lost because of his betrayal. But that in the end, I kept thanks to a refinancing we did a while ago. That was probably the best thing that could have happened to me. Sometimes I think about how things would have been if the apartment had been in both our names, if he could have legally sold it or forced a sale, and it gives me chills. But it didn't happen, and that's what matters. Last week, I was on my terrace having a glass of wine after work, looking at the city, and I thought about everything that happened 6 months ago. About that phone call in Seattle that changed everything, about the panic I felt, the rage, the satisfaction of discovering he couldn't do what he thought he could do. And I realized it doesn't hurt anymore. It doesn't even make me angry. It's just something that happened. Something that taught me I can be stronger than I thought, that I can defend what's mine, that I don't need anyone who doesn't value me. Derek wanted to start a new life and ended up with nothing, and I, who, according to him, was too cold and controlling. I'm perfectly fine, better than fine actually, living in my space, doing what I want, without having to worry about anyone's lies or betrayals. I guess in the end, life has its way of doing justice. Not always fast, not always obvious, but eventually things fall into place and people end up where they deserve to be.